People of Reddit, what is the scariest thing you think mankind has ever created? Delta 1136 said, the most terrifying inventions are biological weapons. You can't see them and you die horribly. In the best case you die within minutes, in the worst it can take hours or days. Or you don't die and there are permanent damages to you. Daytrucker said, surprised this isn't higher up given we're in the middle of a pandemic. Imagine COVID but with around 50% of infected dying. Edit. Okay, just imagine COVID then, or airborne HIV, or pick your favorite pathogen. The point stands. https:/www.cdc.gov/avianflu/avian-dirk-qa.htm https://fuzz.org/peer-pumps/science-and-security-the-moratorium-on-gain-on-function-experiments-2/ All research on H5N1 transmission was halted after laboratories at the University of Wisconsin and the Dutch Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, Netherlands created mutant forms that could be transmitted directly among ferrets. This was concerning because viruses that are easily transmissible between ferrets are often also easily transmissible between humans. Kiyahara said, supposedly both the US and Russia have created bioweapons in labs that are hundreds of times more lethal and contagious than anything out in the open, real end-of-the-world shit. I heard that they were designed more for the practice of defeating them, but the thought that one could escape and end humans is terrifying. QBA23 said, what are you talking about? If an actual deadly bacteria or virus was to escape, humans would take action. They would stay at home so as not to give it a chance to infect others. They would wear protective gear if needed to meet someone. They would take vaccine as soon as it became available. They would absolutely not cross international borders so as not to spread it even further. They would responsibly contact the authorities upon noticing signs of infection. What are we even worrying about? Dank Image Macro said, it is worth mentioning that testing is really a poor descriptor for the intent of the operation. They knew it would work. The point was a demonstration, not a test. The logic was that they were risking the pilots to demonstrate the might of the USSR to the world, in hopes that it would deter a preemptive attack that could cost billions of lives, and possibly the human race itself. I don't see it as morally bankrupt so much as believing their own propaganda. If you believe that the only thing that keeps the USA from destroying you in a fiery instant is mutually assured destruction, then it behooves you to constantly demonstrate how mutually assured that destruction is. DeVito said, the short version is that we were advised, in the US style if you know what I mean, not to test nuclear weapons. During that time, our neighbor Pakistan was backed by the US when it came to arsenal, so it was in their best interest if India was behind them. We failed quite a few times, and with every failed test, those advices started to sound like warnings. IDK what would have happened if her final test wasn't successful in Pokhran, because all of these tests were done in secret and the government thought that there would be no point in hiding them if the tests were successful. But alas, things were not so smooth. Not only were our first few tests unsuccessful, but us realized that we were testing nuclear weapons behind their backs as well. Their reaction wasn't very welcoming. After our first success in Pokhran, us had no choice but to accept us, and they stopped interfering in our military business. PM Masonic OCS said, the only reason the Rods from God project was invented was as a way to circumvent the ban of putting nuclear weapons platforms into space. If the US or the Soviets really wanted to do it, they could have put nuclear missile platforms into space for a fraction of the cost and with far more destructive potential. Thankfully this was banned before anyone had the chance to build one, at least as far as the general public knows. It's still possible that the ban was secretly violated, or that someone got a nuke platform up there before the ban was in place, and they just kept quiet about it. Considering that the US military had like 7 massive telescopes in orbit which were significantly better than the Hubble telescope, and predated the Hubble telescope, yet remained a complete secret for half a century, makes it seem plausible. The Soviets were doing shit like this too. For example, there was their secret armed Almaz space stations and Polaris orbital laser weapon, and those are just 2 things we know about. Space Bojangles said, The Tsar bomb was reduced in power as most of the increase would have just blown up into the upper atmosphere and the energy would have been lost. After a certain point the energy is lost to space as the power is just so immense. That's partly the reason why we don't have 20+ megaton weapons anymore. 1-5 is terrifyingly powerful and plenty considering the accuracy our delivery systems, MIRV, are and the sheer number of bombs they can deliver. A typical current Ohio-class nuclear sub is probably the most terrifying weapon ever devised. It's basically undetectable, can travel for months at a time without surfacing, doesn't need fuel, and carries 24 Trident II ballistic missiles each equipped with an average of 4 500 kiloton warheads. That means one sub has on average about 100 or more warheads, each capable of striking anywhere within 8,000 nautical miles, actual range is classified, and essentially wiping it out. Oh, and given it can place itself anywhere with water, your warning time is essentially zero. Space Bojangles said. Yup. And that's its slowest payload. Trident IIs can technically carry 8 500 kilotons warheads, 192 total, and 14 smaller warheads with about 90-100 KT. That's a max of about 336 warheads each, plenty capable of completely destroying a city. Just for reference, Fat Man at Nagasaki was 20 kilotons. There are just under 200 countries on Earth. This means one Ohio-class submarine can effectual nuke every country on Earth and then nuke most of them again with a bomb 5 times the power of Nagasaki. And the US has 18 of them somewhere around the world. Reenactment said. This is when nukes aren't necessarily scary in the hands of countries like the USA and Russia. The scarier prospect is smaller countries or insurgents getting a hold of nuclear missiles. The point of war is to get something out of it. There are enough other military inventions that allow this to happen. Nukes are largely a deterrent because of China, Russia, USA, England, France, etc. decided to go to war these days. No one would use a nuke and they would fight with other means. Now an extremely small population, that isn't risking 100s of millions of their own people. They would have less qualms with threatening the use of nukes. It is the only thing that really pushes their agenda. Space Bojangles said. I mean, nuclear weapons may also be the greatest invention of history. I've watched history videos on YouTube that point out that we've had our longest stretch of peace between major world powers, well, since ever. That may not hold forever. There may be someone nihilistic or evil enough to start a nuclear war, but hopefully not. At least until we establish an off-world colony that's self-sustaining. Currently though, it's preventing wars of unimaginable horror from being fought. I can't imagine the amount of death and destruction modern weapons could inflict in an all-out war. And let's face it, there are no rules in love and war: biological weapons, chemical weapons, weaponized drones. If unleashed from the restrictions of law, the most nefarious and cutthroat regimes around the world would unleash terrifying weapons that would probably make nuclear weapons look like children's toys. A single bomb can wipe out a city, death toll in the millions. A genetically engineered virus, racially targeted poisons and diseases? The death toll would be billions with no way out. Vinny Certo said. The US, Russian, and, probably, Chinese ICBMs aren't equipped with single warheads nowadays, but rather multiple warheads called multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs as Op mentioned. MIRV should itself be somewhere on this list as they pretty much make any ICBM defense system worthless if the missile gets to the release stage. They basically ensure that a single missile can take out an entire metropolitan area. So while a US nuclear sub can carry only a couple dozen or so missiles, those missiles carry multiple warheads, meaning that a single sub is capable of destroying a large swath of Russia-China by itself. That's why mutual assured destruction works as a deterrent against a full-on war between the US, Russia, and China. Noro said. Bioweapons are easily worse than nuclear weapons. Even in the worst-case scenario nuclear war, life goes on and recovers. The environment wouldn't even be appreciably more radioactive compared to today after just a few centuries. With a biological weapon though, things can get way worse. What happens if someone makes airborne rabies? Or splices the genes to produce botulinum toxin into species of microorganisms that are far more ubiquitous than Clostridium botulinum? You could turn entire continents into wastelands where nothing with a nervous system can survive. Hell, you could kill most of the planet like that, especially if you put it into phytoplankton. The worst part is that bioweapons do not decompose eventually like chemical weapons, or decay away like nuclear fallout. Biological weapons are alive, they grow and spread, and once they're out there they become a part of the environment permanently unless you do some really tricky safeguarding against unlimited cell divisions that is somehow 100% effective. In a world where all the water on the planet, salty or fresh, is loaded with neurotoxins produced by bacteria, animal life needs to either not have a nervous system or it needs to evolve new mechanisms to send nerve impulses that are not blocked by the toxins. That basically means reverting evolutionary progress to the Precambrian, and optimistically puts life back about 500 million years. Bass Royal II said. During the early days of atomic weapons development, a particular scientist was doing criticality experiments using the plutonium core sitting inside a beryllium sphere. The short version of the science is the more the sphere is closed, the more decaying particles from the plutonium bounce off it and the faster the core reacts. They had a bunch of safety measures because if it completely closed the reaction could get out of control. But this guy decides to see how much more he can get out of it by circumventing all the safety measures and using a screwdriver blade wedged between the halves of the sphere to get a stronger reaction. He gets distracted, slips, the core goes critical. He manages to shut down the reaction, but in the process takes a massive dose of radiation and dies a few days later. Zombies said. The Demon Core was a plutonium core originally intended to be used in a third bomb dropped on Japan during World War II, but was then repurposed to be used in experiments. One experiment involved enclosing the core inside two halves of a beryllium sphere. This sphere acted as a reflector for the radiation, like using mirrors to focus sunlight. The core would be placed in the bottom half of the beryllium sphere and the second half would be slowly lowered down over the top. The closer the two halves came together, the closer the core would be to critical or supercritical. The idea was to use shims to control the space between the two halves of the beryllium sphere to get the core to be right on the cusp of critical. Then Dr. Slotin decided instead of using shims he'd just use a flathead screwdriver. He performed the experiment several times this way, often in front of an audience. Then, as you could have guessed, one day he slipped, the top half of the beryllium sphere fell and completely enclosed the core. It went near supercritical for a second, spewing out shit ton of radiation while Slotin quickly removed the top of the sphere. He died 9 days later. I'm not an expert on this, so if anyone has anything to add, feel free. Chinlk said. Ever heard of the bamboo torture? Basically tie a person down onto the ground where a bamboo shoot is growing. Make sure the bamboo is under the person and let them stay there for a few days, and the bamboo will pierce the dude as the bamboo grows. Oh, and that nasty one where the guy is stuck in middle of the pond, ocean or whatever and strapped between two boats, sandwich and fed honey and milk only. Not bad? Well, you can't clean yourself as you defecate and honey attracts bugs and milk goes bad eventually and bugs grow from your feces and piss and eat you alive. Coolius69 said. I actually switched majors in college for this precise reason alone. I used to want to pursue marine biology. The first year was depressing. What happens in the entire environmental science field is that people pursue them because they want to save the environment. However, the only available job opportunities are to help companies exploit the environment. Jobs like surveying land for logging companies or finding mines for mining companies. These people don't want to take no as an answer. Another path is to become a scientist, but as you have guessed it, nobody would listen. We already know that our world is headed to a doomsday. The carrying capacity of planet Earth is finite, and when we inevitably overshoot, mass death is assured, but there's nothing we can do to stop it. Whale Mango said. I mean, devil's advocate here, but mad is probably a big reason why there hasn't really been another large-scale war between the superpowers. Even with all the violence happening today, we really are living in a time of relative peace compared with pretty much any other time in history. Proborslav5 said. There was a persistent belief in the US armed forces throughout the 50s and 60s that we could use nuclear weapons strategically on the battlefield without triggering Armageddon. We figured we could use tiny nuclear weapons more effectively than dropping hundreds of conventional bombs. There was, from my limited understanding, a power struggle between the Army and the Air Force over who would be in charge of the nukes. Oppenheimer sided with the Army because he believed the Air Force guys were fucking nuts and couldn't be trusted to use the weapons responsibly. The Air Force also backed the research into thermonuclear weapons, which could only be used to obliterate all of mankind. Fusion weapons were so large that the only thing they were practical for was vaporizing large civilian centers. For opposing the Air Force in the development of the H-bomb, Oppenheimer was stripped of any nuclear regulatory access and labeled a communist. Stitch Mida 2 said, "I'd rather be vaporized than survive the bomb and have to live in a nuclear wasteland for weeks while my DNA slowly dies and my skin falls off from radiation poisoning." Just listen to some of the stories from the Hiroshima survivors. They talk about their skin and eyes burning, watching mothers diving into rivers with their babies to escape the burning, people charred to a crisp, men walking around with eyeballs hanging out of their heads, buildings all around on fire and crumbling, trees just blown away. And if you get enough radiation, your DNA dies and your body can no longer create any new cells, and so you literally begin to just rot away while still alive. Organs shut down, skin falls off, you can't eat anything or drink anything, fungus grows on your open wounds, your blood cells deform and die off. Blanio said, "Biological weapons. Sure, there's a convention that countries have agreed to that makes production illegal, but not all countries abide by it, and as the good guys you need to have your own in the pack so they'll be too afraid to use it. Yeah, nukes are scary, but at least that's an instant death for most of the population. A biological weapon could take a long time to actually kill a population, or even spread. Hell, even COVID took a relative long time to spread. Took months, whereas nukes would be a few hours. Plus not everyone would be susceptible to the weapon. Imagine surviving a pandemic that killed 99% of the global population. Even global thermonuclear war would have more survivors than that." Horseloose Hospital said, "I like to hope it's growing pains. I might be a crazy optimist, which is hilarious even type, if you knew my cynical ass lol, but I really and truly believe if we manage to live through the next couple decades it'll level off. Once the majority of people have lived with it their whole lives, have always had the ability to search for answers to questions they may not be able to ask girl. When people can open their minds without the social or legal or whatever consequences they might face due to the culture, religion, country they live in. I don't by any stretch imagine a utopia. I'm not stupid. I'm sure people gonna people till we stop making people. I just think at some point the tide will turn. Those that are now a defingly loud minority will be drowned out by the majority who aren't afraid to look for better ways of doing things. It's already happening in small ways. Look at the leaps in the acceptance of and just acknowledging mental health as an important thing alone in the past decade. That's what I mean. Things like that. But more, and bigger. Or we might blow ourselves up next Tuesday. It could literally go either way." Deputy Cartman said, "I'm honestly going to have to go with social media in its current form. Nuclear weapons have chains of command and are kept under lock and key. Some private cannot initiate a nuclear strike, but any nitwit can hop on Facebook, Instagram, etc. and fall into the rabbit hole of extremism, believing whatever some shithead tells them due to lack of critical thinking skills, people who know how to exploit social media doing just that, and so forth. And this has happened to millions of people. I honestly think social media has been a net negative to humankind, and that, if it had been invented in the 1940s, we would still have polio-crippled people being placed in iron lungs every year. Edit, initiate, equals intimate. Fucking autocorrect." Giggly said, "Nuclear bombs. Imagine a bomb so scary that any nation is basically crossed off the list for invasion. War, despite no matter how gruesome or gory. All the death, torture, starvations, fire, and disease that came out of war. No one once looked at something fired once and said, yeah, no, there is no fighting that level of death and horror. Nukes are what kept a planet at peace for the majority of the world, based on the understanding that if you get turned to dust in a second you are considered the lucky one on the receiving end. It is by far the scariest thing mankind has ever created." Kamai 19 said, "Late-stage global capitalism. The campaigns control the candidates. The drones control the drone program. Capital controls the capitalists. The deists were right, except it wasn't God who wound this doomsday clock. It was us. The imperatives of short-term profit maximization, now systematically entrenched at almost every level of every society, and underpinned by a profoundly interconnected globalized financial system, leaves very little room for meaningful big-picture human agency, even for the most powerful individual actors, much less as peons browsing Reddit when we should be maximizing our precious productive capacity. It's why Western countries in particular couldn't do anything about COVID in February 2020, any more than they have about climate change, even though they all saw it coming. Many leaders probably did want to, say, preemptively shut down schools' businesses, but it was politically impossible until serious impacts were already being felt, because there exists a powerful systematic bias against sacrificing existing production in anticipation of hypothetical future conditions, and there's no serious mechanism for incentivizing shared sacrifice or cooperation between marketplace competitors. It's the same reason that neither W nor Obama nor Trump were willing to follow through on promises to get out of the Middle East, even if they genuinely believed the forever wars were morally wrong or strategically harmful to long-term US interests. Ending them would have required shutting off the money hose to corporate interests at the absolute heart of the U.S. economy, interests with sweeping influence across all relevant factions in Washington and US media, which in turn would have required absolutely kneecapping themselves politically. See Joe Biden. It's like Skinner's point about the counterintuitively reciprocal nature of control. For example, the behavior of managers is determined in a very concrete sense by that of their employees, that of teachers, by that of their students, that of lab techs, by that of their lab rats, but at a planetary scale. Leo Stormrage said, "Everyone think nuke is scariest, but virus and bacteria that immune to all medicine humankind have is even more dangerous than a nuke. We are making a lot of antibiotic-resistant bacteria by using antibiotic in wrong way. At some point after a lot of generic trade, a super bacteria that cannot be stopped may arise and kill us all. People fear of nuke, so nuke war not likely to happen. What undus should be the think that most people are unaware of. Get your knowledge now, my friend." Toothpastenich said, "Nuclear power reactors. Chernobyl comes to mind immediately. To sum it up, there was a severe break of protocol leading up to a safety test. The test was delayed by 10 hours and the crew that carried out the test was unprepared. They were forced to do it anyways. When the core exploded, it's estimated that the radioactive material released was 400x the amount of both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings put together. Over 100,000 km2, 39,000 B2, was contaminated and evacuated. So many people died. There isn't even an official number. Just knowing what radiation does to people is so haunting. It's even worse knowing that it could have been prevented." Emma 427 said, "Synthetic nitrogen honestly. Just BC we can suddenly grow enough food to feed a previously impossible amount of people, doesn't mean it's for the best. I think our food system is bats. So much more yield and quantity focused over quality focused. Land stripping and soul destroying. More people, that's great. But how happy nourished do all of us actually feel as we slowly fuck up our planet by sucking it dry of every resource and never giving back? While we eat soybean oil and glyphosate-sprayed grains. Wow. Tasty. Oh wait, kill me. Mind you, this is not everyone. There are sustainable minds at work out there. Grateful for you if you were one." Sly Shorty said, "The rods from God Project. Or Project Star Wars. The theoretical application of tungsten rods that are tipped in aluminum and GPS guided, in space. They would have been similar in size to a telephone pole. When set into free fall, they would reach over Mach 10 as they reach the ground. They would essentially tear open a hole in the crust of the Earth and cause untold kinetic damage. No explosion, no nuclear radiation. Just carnage, silent carnage. One wouldn't be enough to be of concern. But it was proposed that you could put upwards of 70 of these projectiles on one satellite. They would be so fast you couldn't shoot them down and they don't break the rules of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Treaty." Purposely Lost said, "Lies. The scariest thing humans create is the malintentions of our interactions. In today's world, the use of lies and misinformation is a greater threat to our national and global security than a mass-scale global war as seen in the past. With the interconnection of technology, our world can communicate in an instant with the push of a few buttons. Humanity's greatest feature is our ability to communicate precisely, which effectively helps us to coordinate our lives and advance our technology. Now that technology has given us all a voice and opens different channels of communication information, the benefits of communication has ironically turned on us. NATO recognizes disinformation and misinformation as one of the key features in the modern and future theaters of warfare. For example, The USA is currently at ends with itself, with a major divide in the population as well as people against government because there are multiple narratives for the same story. Conspiracies and lies that are posted to internet forums and spread like wildfire. Things that could easily be written by foreign entities. The lies and misinformation found across the internet make it difficult for people to know who to trust. Beyond that, in recent years it is clear the government lies and is not exactly morally sound. Shutting down global communication in favor of a government voice that we listen to is not a valid option due to corruption and lies within the government itself. It only worked previously because citizens were not as privy to government corruption because it was hard to talk about and expose. Purposely Lost said. Without being able to trust the government because of either truth or lies online in conjunction with multiple narratives of the same story, so who do we trust? Who can we rely on? What is the truth of? Insert topic here. The answers are not crystal clear and consequently we see a halt in the growth of mankind until knowledge flows freely, lies stop, and individual freedom and safety is secured. Things that simply won't happen. So yeah, the scariest thing mankind has created is our own willingness to and reliance on lies. Big One Ron on his hip said. Nuclear weapons. During the Cold War there was a point where all life on Earth would have been obliterated by a total nuclear apocalypse if it wasn't for one man, Stanislav Petrov. The guy who pushes the big red button and against the orders of his commander, decided that the radar detecting several missiles heading towards Russia might be malfunctioning and did not launch a counterattack, mutually assured destruction. He was right. If he had followed orders, we would all be dead right now. It also happened 21 years earlier during the Cuban Missile Crisis. A man named Vasily Arkhipov refused to launch a nuclear torpedo after the other officers on board the submarine they were in thought that war had possibly already broken out. They had been cut off from Russian comms for days. He was the only officer to say no and the decision had to be unanimous. These are two incidents that are documented in public, so we can only imagine the type of shit that we've never heard of. Terrifying to think about. Literally came within the press of a button of everyone being wiped off the face of the planet. Fidget said. Money. Switching from a bartering system to physical markers of effort, especially given that your pay no longer has much to do with how physically or mentally difficult your task is, and more to do with where you were born and to who you met along the way with your birth family's help. This has caused us to dissociate from reality. It's rewarded absolute greed, thus, climate change, and aggression, thus, colonialism. It's also brought back some of the worst parts of feudalism, such as the fact that you likely die from the elements or malicious actions from others if you don't have protection from a noble, which is now how American health insurance works, as it's through your employer prohibitively expensive. Crucifo said. Religion. You might think thermonuclear weapons, or chemical nerve agents, or biological weapons, or other scary stuff. While those are scary, they are nothing but a pimple on the ass of religion. Religion has killed more people on the planet than anything, excepting giant asteroids. Religion has imbued people with the idea that because someone doesn't believe worship as you do, you have the right to strip them of their humanity, enslave them, torture them, abuse them, murder them, all while feeling a smug sense of self-righteousness that you were right, and they were wrong. Religion gives people, in their minds, carte blanche to rape, maim, and murder. Oh, but not your religion, right? Definitely not. Your religion is the one true religion. Your religion is a religion of peace and love. Whatever helps you sleep at night.